Okay, we're continuing with this book here, The Hidden History of Health and Science by me, Pete Rogers. We're on part 7, and we're kind of talking how science really developed. And it came out of the Catholic Church in Europe, okay? Anybody else who tells you otherwise, they're talking nonsense. It's rather obvious once you've studied the history of it. Here's St. John Canty, is also called Jan Canty, Polish priest. He was another one of these genius polymaths doing work in multiple fields. Back in those days, you could pretty much know just about everything in all the different fields. He did early work on physics, laws of motion that Isaac Newton later developed. As he said, he stood on the shoulders of giants. Okay, remember the Polish had some pretty smart people. They also had, of course, Copernicus. Okay, here's a guy, Ambros Pere, and he was a surgeon. Back in the old days, the surgeons were the same as the barbers, okay? And it was considered a rather primitive thing. You're working on external wounds, a lot of amputations. He said, I bandage the wound, but God heals, which is being honest. If you look at the barber pole, the white is for the bandage, the red is for the blood, okay? And, regular surgery didn't really become part of medicine until after anesthesia was becoming available, like, let's say, in the late 1800s. This guy, Ambros Pere, is from the 1500s. Okay, here's another one of these early doctor guys, Andreas Vesalius, Italian, and he's did a lot of work in anatomy. He's another Catholic. And here, of course, is the big dog, Copernicus. And this is a painting of Copernicus by Jan Matejko, the great Polish artist. Paintings from 1872. And, he figured out the sun was in the center. He couldn't definitively prove it, but all the evidence that he could come across, he felt, supported that idea. It was until later when they started having better binoculars and telescopes that they could prove it. Here's the famous Dr. Paracelsus, and he's the guy who said the dose makes the poison, and he's sometimes considered like the father of toxicology and modern pharmacology. Okay, here's another astronomer, Tycho Brahe. And I'm going to show you the next guy who I really want to talk about. He's a famous Lutheran. He worked with the Jesuits. 35 craters on the moon are named after the Jesuits. Now here's Kepler, and one of the big things Kepler figured out was that orbits are elliptical, so you don't need this concept of epicycles anymore, and you got to let go of Aristotle's perfect spheres. But just to give you a sense of the way these guys think, because this is rather typical, here's what Kepler said about being a scientist and an astronomer. For many years, I wanted to be a theologian, but now I see how God is also praised by my work in astronomy. Science is the process of thinking God's thoughts after Him. The laws of nature are within the grasp of the human mind. God wanted us to recognize them. He created us after His own image so that we could share in His thoughts. I am merely thinking God's thoughts after Him. The chief aim of studying the external world is to discover the rational order and the harmony imposed on it by God, which He reveals to us in the language of mathematics. The wisdom of the Lord is infinite. The heavens declare the glory of God. And he wrote his book about it, and some people thought his book was too complicated, and he said, it does not matter if my book finds its reader in 100 or even 1,000 years. Has not God Himself waited 6,000 years for a human mind to be capable of gazing on His celestial spheres with understanding? Okay, so the point of all that is how intensely devout, Kepler, one of the greatest astronomers, geniuses of astronomy that ever lived. And that's pretty typical. That's how Isaac Newton would speak, Michelangelo, Bach, and lots of others. And so that's another reason why I can tell you 100% certainty the 99% of the best scientific work was done by Christians, okay? And it was done by these Christian men that wanted to, study the nature of God's creations, okay? It's pretty obvious. Up until the 1960s, women were having 10 or 15 children. They didn't have time for any of this type of stuff. So anyways, that's it for today. I hope you found that helpful.